If you're an IC in your career and maybe you're thinking about whether or not to take a step into leadership, I think the single best thing you can do for yourself and for the people you may end up inheriting as your direct reports is to ask yourself, is this really what I want? Is leadership a vocation for me, or is it just a progression? Because if it's just a progression, I wonder if there are other ways that you can go and continue to progress in a way that's full of technical excellence in some way. And but if you actually feel compelled to lead and take that step on a separate career path to go and lead, despite the fact that they look like they're channeling up like that.
Welcome to this episode of Facing Disruption. I am your host, AJ Bub. Today we are joined by Ben Perreau, founder of Parafoil and somebody with a really fascinating career arc. And I'm really excited to have you on. From building the world's biggest music website at 24, before vibe coding was even a thing, to working as a journalist at BBC, spending 7.5 years at SY Partners, the strategy firm started by Steve Jobs' personal staff, which I'm just learning about now. I can't believe I didn't hear about. Ben, you've worked with C-suite leaders across Google, Meta, Apple. You really focus on vision and cultural transformation. And I am really, really interested in hearing your points of view around how we're building and developing the next generation of leaders, how they're coming up, where we're making mistakes. And before we get even further into it, I'll turn it over to you to do the rest of your introduction.
AJ, thanks so much for having me. I mean, you did such a fantastic job. I don't even know if I could have done a better job myself. But yeah, as you mentioned, spent a whole bunch of time as a journalist. Then I worked in leadership development, organizational development, business strategy, that kind of stuff. Got to witness some of the most amazing leaders working alongside them every single day, and got to learn so much from them. And then now I'm building software again, which is my true love. And so I'm building Parafoil to help early career managers, leaders figure out their path through and that transition from being an IC. So yeah.
Awesome. And I love the fact that you are a builder and engineer as well, because I think that's what's going to make this conversation really land with the audience. Because, being from Silicon Valley myself, being an engineer myself, you see it all the time, is you get so good at your job, you're promoted to manager. And all of a sudden,
it gets hard.
Faster. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. And I would say, I'm not sure I could adequately call myself a software engineer. I would probably call myself a product manager more than I call myself a software engineer by profession in that way, or maybe an entrepreneur. But certainly many years ago, I wrote a little more code than I do now. I think for the sake of our engineering team and everybody else, it's better that I don't write any code these days. Although, there are certainly areas where I love to play around a little bit. Leadership is hard, right? Taking the journey to being a leader, to being a manager, is not for the faint-hearted. And I think, to your point, so many people who are gifted technically in their profession, as a software engineer, as a designer, as a marketer, in other contexts, so many people who are so gifted are given the opportunity or sometimes voluntold, honestly, that they need to transition into leadership to earn more money. It's used as a way to retain people in the company. But I think few people realize what a dramatic transition it really is. And, the way I think about it is it's a completely different vocation with almost no relationship with your previous job. In fact, your judgment is important in your previous job. And, when you're early in your management career, often you're a player coach. So there's still quite a lot of IC work that you need to continue to do. But all of a sudden you encounter these new challenges: empathy, interpersonal skills, stakeholder management, how you can generate vision for your team, how you can help everyone understand what good looks like. These are all skills that you have to develop almost overnight because you're thrust into the spotlight. And so I think it's really hard. I have nothing but empathy for people who are choosing to take part into leadership. And I will say, again, to your point, it's not for everyone.
So you're saying that it's broken. Now we know, moving to IC to manager, different skill set, but but what is the break there, right? Okay, these skills can be learned. What's happening that's not facilitating that?
Yeah. I don't know if we have fully internalized how significant the delta is in terms of your ability to make the transition. I also think, those of us who are really good at the IC part of our job may have risen through the ranks fast academically, or we may have been fantastic in our kind of area of technical expertise. And that gets rewarded with we really want to keep you because you're brilliant. And so companies say, hey, we're going to promote you. And all of a sudden you're going to go from an L something to an M something role in the company. And there's a reason why the letter changes, but I don't think there's enough support for people in making that transition. It's more like, go for it. Now you're getting paid more, maybe. And you're having to make the transition. And some companies are streaming people into more senior roles as ICs. We see staff engineer roles, principal engineer roles. Some of those are helpful for folks who want to continue to be awesome, amazing engineers all the way up. But, there are still, I think, some folks left in the workforce who believe that management and leadership is just an extension of the job. And if you continue to treat it like that, then people are going to continue to flounder. And the data supports that. So there was a survey done by the Chartered Institute of Managers, and they found that 82% of managers consider themselves accidental managers, which means they've been thrust into the role with little or no support. And to back that up, a third of all new managers' teams leave within the first year because they're dissatisfied with their manager. And we find that the delta between anybody being promoted and them getting management support, so training, access to tools that will help them, in some cases coaching, that's on average 10 years between promotion, first management promotion, and actually receiving any support and training. So that's a decade within which
that's
you've got the opportunity to go and you've got to go and inflict a whole load of damage in that time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. The saying that you always hear is people don't leave jobs, they leave managers.
Right. I mean, that's been the case for me when I've worked. It matters to me how good my manager is, maybe sometimes more than the company.
Absolutely, because the manager is your direct line into the company. They control, I'll use the word control, but they have a huge impact on your visibility, on the projects you get. I have worked definitely with managers that, because of their insecurity of their own role, they suppress the accomplishments of their team.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not helpful to anybody.
I've had incredible managers who have supported me, who have helped me realize there are ways to lead that I didn't realize existed. And I've had managers who said things to me like, I'll take credit for all your work, but that's management. Or other people who have said, I don't think many people on your team are very good, but my suggestion for how you deal with that is throw a hand grenade through the door and hold the door shut. Those are pretty bad ways to lead in my experience. And if you're working for long enough, you eventually get to experience the entire spectrum of different qualities of leaders, managers in different contexts. And when they are more like the latter, you tend to not stick around for as long. And that means company churn. That means companies can honestly, growth can stall. Companies can find themselves in a death spiral sometimes as a result of not having good leadership culture.
Yeah. So let's take a step back a little bit. I want to talk about this website that you built when you were 24, right? Because especially at that age, to build the world's largest music website, right? I would imagine you didn't do that alone.
I did not do that alone. Let's be clear. So there was a team, and I was leading the team. Yeah.
So at a young age, you're becoming a leader of something significant, right? We talk about a 10-year gap, unless you were, at 14 learning to be a leader. How did you overcome that bump? What was your experience like?
That was a really amazing time to be in the music industry in the UK. I think people now affectionately refer to that as the indie sleaze era. And I was lucky enough to inherit leadership of NME.com at a time when British music was really in its ascendancy again for a while, and lucky enough to go and work at the music magazine that was the first place to create the idea of a chart and write about all these amazing bands from, the Sex Pistols to Jesus and Mary Chain to Oasis to the Strokes. And so I got a kind of front seat there. But also, I was just so excited by the scene that was happening, but I didn't realize that I had applied for a job that was perhaps a little more senior than I was qualified for. And so on my first day, it started to dawn on me exactly what role I had inherited, because I thought I was going in sort of somewhere near the middle. And they said, here's your desk. We want to start talking about what we're going to do with the Mac, and there were all these kind of fairly big questions about what we're going to go and do. And so I immediately went to it was a 1960s office block in London. I went into the bathroom where all the cubicles were stood up, and I stood inside one of the cubicles, closed the door, locked the door, and rested my forehead against the back of the door and thought, what have I done? And at that point, I was kind of in a cold sweat, honestly, because I was just like so intimidated by the work I had to go and do. And for the next 6 to 9 months, our job was to go and redevelop that product from scratch. So we completely overhauled that product as a team. And I had to learn to manage people for the first time. And I'll be honest, I was not good at leadership or management in that context. I think I oscillated between somebody who was massively over-delegating and somebody who was completely laid back, like out of the way. You do what you think is right. I don't, And most people, I think, in the early days of management oscillate between those two things without necessarily any of the in-between. And so that meant like hyper-directional, like do this now, because it was the newsroom, so there was a bit of that anyway. Or, this kind of laissez-faire style. And so it took many, many years before I even encountered the idea of seeking feedback, if I'm honest. And I got the feedback I needed in spite of myself. And at the age of 28, 29, people were starting to give me feedback whether I liked it or not. And I didn't, right?
Yeah.
And to start with, when you get feedback for the first time, it really hurts, right? It sucks to get feedback for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've done it, and it's the first time you're getting feedback. So you've got this like wonderful veneer you've crafted for yourself. You believe for yourself, and you think, oh yeah, well, I'm obviously great at the things I'm great at, and probably not good at some things too. But whatever those things are, they don't matter, because like my career's going great, And by the time I was 28, I was working for a large multinational broadcaster, leading a team of 140 people. And I had broadly still no idea how to lead. I'd done like an accelerated leadership development training course, which had taught me some frameworks and stuff, but it hadn't really given me much insight. And I was still very new and actually, honestly, like in human terms, very young, and therefore inexperienced at the journey of life. And so I managed to encounter a couple of leaders, I think, who were kind to me and gentle enough to be able to give me the feedback in a way that I could hear it. And that was when I think I really started to shift and get better. And honestly, it wasn't until I was in my mid-30s that I really started to become somebody who is the kind of leader that I would respect now. It takes a while when you are resistant or not self-aware enough to learn, I think. And so that I think was a journey. It wasn't an easy path to go on, if I reflect on it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. The leader that you are now, the leader that you respect, what do they look like? What are those behaviors and traits that say like, yes, this is the leader. This is what good leadership looks like.
One of the things I've come to realize over the course of the last 10 years is self-awareness is a journey, not a state. And so I'm definitely somebody who is consistently seeking to become better at building my spidey sense, my resonance with what's going on. And even, in the last few years, that's meant I've had to kind of think differently about how I lead. How do you lead in most people's best manager and leader is not always their favorite manager and leader in terms of just their experience with the person. If you're somebody who's really committed to your own performance, then sometimes you're working with people who can be quite tough. And it's okay to work with people who are quite tough if that's what you want to do at this point in your career. And then at some points in your career, you might want to work with people who are less, tough. And I think I can be tough, but I also really care about being empathetic and understand the context of every individual I'm working with. And so it's been important for me to learn. And I'm not saying I've got it all figured out by any means, but it's been important for me to learn how do I have empathy for the moment that this person is in, both in terms of their role, but also just situationally overall. And I think I'm building a better relationship with that over time with the more life experience I have, but also in just being inquisitive about people and what makes us tick and the narratives we all hold about ourselves and so on. So that's been really important, being understanding how to be somebody who holds people to high standards, because I hold myself to a high standard, but also have a good sense of empathy. And I think, the other thing that's really developed for me is understanding how to make sure that I'm also modeling doing things like taking breaks and taking a rest. I actually took a vacation in the last 2 months and went to India and had a wonderful time just disconnecting. In fact, I think my team will agree that I wasn't even on Slack very much. And so it was really great to be able to spend some time away from work. And I hope that other people on the team feel like they can also take time away from work as well as a result of it,
Yeah, I think that's so important. That's some of the behaviors that I really try to present to the people that work for me as well, especially during my time at Accenture and leading my team there, is, you work hard, but you take breaks. You strive to be the best you can, but you also have to, like you said, be empathetic, what's going on in the life, especially now, right? I mean, the whole idea with facing disruption and why we also like to talk about mental health and emotional resilience is because we have so much external chaos happening right now, the uncertainty, instability, to try to push people to do more with less, right? We're really leaning into the burnout phase, and that's damaging. It's damaging to people for a long time. So we have to figure out, how do we respect that to enable people to perform as much as they can in the world that we're in, right?
Completely. And what does performance mean to every individual in terms of what you're doing well? For some people, performance means, I'm doing a fantastic job of achieving a list of tasks every single day with consistency. For some people, that means explosive creativity and new ideas, that they're solving novel problems every day, and that's different. For some people, that means balancing, taking care of their family or themselves in combination with the work that they're doing. Everyone gets to define their own version of what performance means to them in any context or another, but we are expecting so much of people now in the workplace that I think we all have to reevaluate what we're expecting of our teams, and also what we're expecting of ourselves, so that we can try and make sure we match those things better,
Yeah, I get getting those measurements right is so important. I remember I had an engineer that worked for me, and he would come in the office, usually late, 10 o'clock, and sit at the desk reading on his phone, like the whole day. And he would leave, and then at 2 a.m, you would get dozens of pull requests and code commits and all of this work. And the reality is, he was a night owl. He did his best work at night. And we were looking at it, and optically, he's in the office, not doing work. We're getting, our leaders saying, who is this guy? What's he doing? It's like we had to shift around him because he was a great engineer. I mean, he still is. But it's like the measurements. So, go on.
I was just going to say, I think it's so true, and understanding that this is something that has been relatively recent in the workplace, which is understanding that everybody is individual. I'm a believer in bringing your best self to work. Like, that matters to me in terms of how I think about my own self at work. But I also am fully aware that people on my team and I work better at different times of the day. Like, I'm much better at some of the high processing cognitive tasks earlier in the day. And once it gets into the kind of late afternoon, I usually need to go and take a dip, maybe have some coffee, and even take a bit of time off. And I'll get back into it sometimes in the evening. That just kind of works better for me. But, I'm absolutely useless at work after about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. Absolutely no good. And so I know those things about myself. And now I know those things about myself. I try and schedule my work around it and have some privilege to be able to go and do so. But, historically, I remember working with somebody who, when I was in the UK, and this was many years ago, they were sort of and they'd come from Southern Europe, and they were used to taking a siesta every afternoon. And I remember my boss coming around to me and being like, "What are they doing?" And I was like, "Well, that person's traditionally, culturally, they take time out usually for an hour or two a day, but they're back at it. Don't worry, later on." And my boss was like, "We're not doing that." And I was like, "Okay." And that person ultimately was like, "This isn't a good fit for me."
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just that, but there were multiple things that stacked up. And so I lost access to that talent, honestly. And that was a real shame. So I think we're learning now that every individual approaches work in different ways. That doesn't mean we have to make crazy allowances for everyone. But if the contribution is good, it doesn't matter how the contribution always happens. So I think I agree with your sort of observation there.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the progression that we're having or that we're seeing from IC to manager. And, recently, Silicon Valley has been doing this for a while. I feel like they have a better sense of keeping the technical people technical for the most part than other places that I've been outside of Silicon Valley. But, I have experience, for example, at Accenture, at Amazon, they started introducing these principal roles and associate directors, like something to try to keep people who are great ICs, give them something to strive for, to recognize them, but keep them out of being a manager. So what are your thoughts on that? And let's start there.
Yeah. We glorify leadership as a society, and I wonder if we may have glorified it a little bit too much. A lot of the time when you get promoted, it's because the company wants to retain you, or you want to make more, do more, achieve more. You want a wider scope. But actually, there are some companies, to your point, who have enough scale, for the most part, that they're able to make choices to go and create these kinds of roles, principal, staff. These roles are really important in these companies. You're dealing with work that is honestly solving novel problems for the first time, looking after significant amounts of surface area as an engineer, coaching and mentoring other engineers. But those things are super important. And actually, we need more of that to be able to have culture carriers, knowledge carriers. You need those people in the organization because they're the DNA, especially in high growth companies that have gone from small to big in a very small amount of time, because somebody needs to carry the DNA of how the company was successful to start with all the way up the chain. And I don't know whether that always means that those people need to go and lead people in the traditional sense. I'm not sure they necessarily need to. And so I'm a fan of these new roles. I'm hoping that people are going to continue to make more of them. I think the big question for me is, how do you do that when your company is not a 20,000 person organization, right? Because it's really hard to be able to make choices to go and put a staff engineer in place when really what you need is more productivity, more mentorship, more guidance, less oversight. I think the opportunity there for me is, we're dealing with broader pyramids in the organization now. So people are taking on more and more direct reports. I think there's negative consequences to that in terms of the amount of pressure it's putting on frontline managers. But I think one of the positive consequences of that, if we choose to take it, and I think it's incumbent on functional leaders to advocate for it, is to be able to say, that means I can have people who are focused on leadership, leading people, and people who are focused on being technically wonderful. And if we dial that in right from a cultural perspective, we will celebrate the people who are fantastic ICs as much as we celebrate the people who are leaders, and we'll find ways to make sure that it's known the amount of value they carry inside the organization, so that we don't have to, and I'm not just talking about fiscally, I mean, if you've got somebody who was critically involved in solving a novel engineering problem really early in the company, which created significant amounts of value for their company's growth early on, or significant amounts of value for your customer base, you should celebrate that and say, hey, listen, this person has been fantastic in the way that they've approached, their engineering problems. And so the more we can start to stream those things early, even when we're a smaller company, and I think that can happen in a company that's as small as 150 people, maybe even smaller, then you can start to say, hey, listen, people dedicated to leadership, you're doing a different job now. People dedicated to greatness in the individual contributions you make, you are continuing to do the job you did, but you're able to progress all the way up into senior. And it's not unheard of that the companies might be able to put people on the leadership team, as in steering committee for the company, like C-suite, who actually have no direct reports whatsoever. In fact, we've had strategic roles like that for years. Chief strategy officer is a role that exists in some companies and often has no more than 4 or 5 direct reports at most, even at that level in a massive company. It could be that there are engineering roles that have no direct reports, but those people are involved in decisions because they understand what's going on with the company and where they're going. So long answer, but my belief is that we need more of this in the workplace.
Now, I feel like I've heard and met a lot of people who are at, I would say, I guess I could call them more legacy enterprises. So like the Coca-Colas, GM, which might not be a good example anymore, but weren't they really big on having these rotational programs for leaders to say, hey, you're going to spend 6 months in finance, marketing, manufacturing, supply chain before you're allowed to become up in the leadership ranks? Is that still happening? Is that something that was lost as we have this new generation of large companies?
You know who I heard did that really well, actually, in terms of training their managers, was American Express. They used to do a really good job of that. I mean, I'm sure they still do. I don't know. I haven't been a consultant for a couple of years now. But there are some companies, to your point, Coca-Cola, GM as well, who have these rotational programs, and they allow you to understand so much more about the organization, so that you can build context, so that you can build the empathy you need to be able to do the stakeholder management. Because, again, to your point, if you're going to be able to carry large bodies of work with a team across the line, you do need to understand at Coca-Cola how the supply chain management works. Of course you do. If you're working at, a company like Amex, you need to understand how different verticals within inside the financial services that they're developing work before you can really go and, draw those stakeholders together to go and become more of a general leader across the space. So maybe these are also programs that we should be thinking more about promoting, so that people can go and spend their time in different contexts, maybe even apprenticing with different kinds of very senior leaders, so that you can go and learn a little bit about what it means to go and get good at that corner of the work, because it'll give you credibility in spaces where you wouldn't necessarily expect. That's a smart idea.
Yeah, and I feel like, at least in my experience, I've been seeing less of that apprenticeship type of thing. And I wonder if it's one of those rose-colored glasses of, I look in the past at the stories I hear and, oh, there was way more mentorship in bringing people up the ranks. Now I feel like, as leaders became leaders, managers became leaders, technicians became leaders, like the knowledge wasn't handed down and it just progressively gets worse and worse and worse. It's like, it's decaying skills. And, one of the things that I worry about is you're getting leaders without that context, without the mentorship, without the feedback. And they're like, I'm a great leader. And then it leaves the organization askew.
Yeah, you're right. There's generation loss, isn't there? Literally in how we're continuing to build our leadership cohorts. And it's becoming more and more difficult as we're sort of all changing into sort of unique shapes of leaders to be able to see what great looks like in different contexts. So I also fear for how well we're doing at creating high-performing organizations when there's so much of a loss of apprenticeship and there's so much pressure placed on like pure productivity in the now versus building a resilient, capable organization and an organism that's able to respond to change and adapt and be able to work in new and different ways as it encounters them. So, we need to make sure we're not just building functional engines that will deal with the kind of work that needs to happen right now, and we're actually building like adaptive systems that can go and you can go and work in new ways as they encounter them.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple times people, individuals, leaders, managers who are carrying the DNA of the culture. I read this a little while ago about this very ambiguously defined role. It doesn't exist, but you know it when it's gone. And they were calling it, I believe, the glue role.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, you think about the choppiness of the organization, you don't have like every skill that you need. And somewhere these individuals come in that kind of spread over everything. And it's like, it's hard to articulate what they do. It's hard to put a KPI on them, but they unlock so much performance from the team. It's like that social butterfly manager. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because this is something I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. I definitely know that role. I've seen it. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've seen that role exist in a couple of different ways, actually. Sometimes, like Yahoo used to appoint somebody that they call the head of Mojo. And like, that was a novel way to do it. And then I've seen, like, in this day and age, companies like, you know, Vibe Champion. Those people exist inside companies. And I'm like, okay, great. I kind of like the idea of that because it gives somebody some sense of responsibility around it. But actually, for me, where it's worked most authentically is when you encounter those people in the workplace. And I'm sure you and I have both sat in a meeting and we've looked over at one of the people in the meeting, whether it's because we're in a consulting role or whether we're inside the organization. And we're like, oh, this person. Lots of people look to this person to understand what the norms are of the organization. Lots of people will ask a question about whether or not this company would do that. And they're sort of looking in that direction in the meeting just to kind of see. And they're the culture carrier of the organization. They're somebody who just for whatever reason has generated their own sense of cultural leadership inside the company. And honestly, to me, you know, great leadership is earned, not awarded. Those people are organic leaders in an organization, and we need to find ways to pathway those kinds of folks into roles where they can lead more, because they obviously have some authorship over the company. Otherwise, people wouldn't be looking to them to understand what the norms are. And they've generated it usually without formal authority of any kind. And so, you know, the more and more we can try and see and spot and understand who those people are, the more we can maybe start to shape our organizations around areas where it's already working. You know, it's the old Kotter-style change management method, which is like put the right organization in place somewhere in the organization, and the organization will start to swing in around it as long as you have people who can lead in there. So yeah, I think it's important for us to be able to recognize who those folks are. It's just when everything is moving at hyperspeed, how do you find those people? How do you see those people, especially when you're, you know, dealing with all of the pressures that you're dealing with in today's workplace?
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot earlier the manager's job at evangelizing for their team, right? And a great manager, a great leader is going to recognize that. They're going to recognize the part that people play within their team to make it functional, right? But, you know, as if the job is not challenging enough, I feel like there's that disconnect of hiring, firing decisions are being made in an obfuscated layer that just says, you didn't use AI enough. Well, doesn't matter which company is doing it, you all can look it up. But they're being rated on the amount of AI that they use. And if they don't consume enough tokens, they get let go. What world are we living in that is the metric, right? We're missing so much on that.
It's odd. And I think, you know, particularly when it comes to AI, we've got a little overexcited looking at utilization over outcomes, right? I think I think there's an opportunity for us to think a bit more about outcomes and make sure the value is there. I think there's a lot of big talk right now in AI, like agentic and all these other things, which, you know, I think we're going to see the advent of some cool tools, and we already are, you know, some of them. But also, I think we also need to have a healthy sense of skepticism and realism for some of the things that we're going to be able to do and we're not able to do. And so my belief is more than just a human in the loop. I think augmentation and partnership, co-pilots, working with humans to be able to get them to be able to achieve more, do more, not just in terms of sheer productivity, but also in terms of creativity. How do we get novel solutions on the table that wouldn't otherwise exist? I think that the promise of AI for me is much more about that than it is about automation. And I'm actually a little bit of an automation skeptic in that if you look back to the advent of the spreadsheet was a foundationally important tool for people working in finance. And yet, in the years after the spreadsheet was invented, we did not suddenly find that everyone who worked in finance went and worked 3-hour work days. Everyone who works in finance is still burning the midnight oil, working all the hours that they've got to be able to achieve things. Maybe they can do more with less now because they're not sitting there hand computing math anymore. But all of these tools, usually in my experience, serve to really significantly enhance our capabilities more than they serve to completely disintermediate us. Of course, there will be shifts in the workforce, but I think we just need to be sensible about how we're approaching how we use these tools in the workplace, and not completely focus on things like how many tokens have you used in a day.
Yeah. I feel like this is the time. Remember, Google had this thing that you worked 20 hours out of every 20 out of every 80 hours on your own personal projects. You had the Fridays to come up and invent and think about things. And like now, with our ability to innovate and invent so quickly, now is the time that we should be giving that learning and the skills training and the freedom. And instead, like you said, we're squeezing productivity out of every single second. So it's like we're not even using the tools to our benefit.
If we get this right, we could engender a golden age of creativity and innovation, right? Because it's now possible for me to go and generate 10 business ideas in a few minutes, or go and get some help to explore 5 different strategies for how you might solve a problem. And that means that we can start to look at different paths, optionality. Ideas can come from left field. They can come from machines, which are really great at ideas that come from the median, or we can use our own expertise where ideas come from the fringes, and bring all those things together and really start to synthesize possibilities in a way that we couldn't before. But we do have to consciously enter that space in a way that means that we're thinking about the best outcomes we want, and not just blindly wading into a dead end. And I think that requires every leader in every organization. In fact, honestly, everybody who's at work, to think like, what kind of person, what kind of way do I want to use AI in a way that means that I'm using it thoughtfully and consciously? And I'm not even talking about ethics. I just mean like, how do you get great using some of these tools,
Yeah, absolutely. I was telling somebody this past week, I was at the AI Summit in New York, and we were talking about vibe coding and this ability to just produce, like, I have an idea, I can produce something. And it was, I made the comment, now, okay, so we talked about the great side. Here's the bad side of it, in my respect. It is the worst time to be a creative with ADHD, because it's like everything, and it's like it used to be you have so many ideas and they're stuck in your head, and now you could just think it into the world and into reality. It's like, oh my God, how do you keep track of all of that? My assistant deals with me day in and day out. I think half of her job is just pivoting my attention to say like, no, we have a deadline. And I love that, right? I empower her to do that. You told a great story. Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, most great business partnerships usually have somebody with a lot of explosive creativity and a lot of operational rigor. And in almost every instance that has existed, we saw it in Jobs and Wars. We saw it, with Gates and Paul Allen. So many times there's somebody who is diligently disciplined, and there's somebody who is like got a lot to kind of give. And so in terms of like just creative firepower, I think there's an opportunity for AI to help us kind of be able to thread that relationship more carefully. So it's just an aside, because I was thinking about what you're saying with your assistant.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there is a level of coaching, one of the things that I wanted to mention earlier, so when we talked about training and like building up these managerial and leadership skills, how often do people get to practice that in a safe space where they can simulate it, learn it, make a mistake, get feedback, and not get it, have an effect on real people's lives in a real business?
How could actors get good if they were on stage the whole time?
Yeah.
Like if the whole time you were just in a play, no rehearsals allowed, then you just wouldn't improve. And so it's really hard to be a leader in this context where everybody has their own competing political agendas. Everybody is forming judgments of you. I've worked in work environments where you're quote unquote only as good as your last meeting. And so the pressure is there for managers to be good, be on, and like all this information coming in from LinkedIn and social media, all this information coming in from all these other places. There's a lot of information out there, and some of it's really good, and some of it's not so good. And so it's really hard to kind of sift through everything and work out where to go and learn from, grow, and find a safe place to be able to go and practice that so that you can improve. I think it's become really hard to become a leader in this day and age, honestly.
I agree with that. You had a great story when we were prepping for this conversation about IBM and some work you did there. Do you want to share that story a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm just trying to remember exactly what we were talking about. Can you jog my memory? Sorry, there's a lot of stuff in the backlog. I'm trying to remember the IBM story.
You went, it was an international trip. It was a cultural transformation workshop.
That's right. So, let me get this story right and make sure I'm thinking about it. So I was lucky enough at one point to work with the former chairman of one of the biggest banks in the world, who happened to be the former chairman of based out of Tokyo. And he had recently retired, and he had teamed up with a couple of his friends once he'd retired from being a very successful banker, because he wanted to build a center for innovation. But it also turned out that he'd been kind of hiding this other half of his self because he wasn't able to bring it into the workplace. He was also a Zen master who'd been practicing meditation and mindfulness for 50 years. So he was master level in terms of his ability to practice. And so we worked with him to build this center for innovation, in fact, meditation and mindfulness, and to bring those things together. And it was his vision. And so we did a number of trips to Tokyo, and during that time we would spend every meeting starting with 20 minutes of meditation at the beginning of our meeting, which, if anybody has never meditated for 20 minutes before at the beginning of a meeting, when you've just got off a flight and you're like, right, ready to go, and you're a consultant, they're like high octane human being. And then they're like, okay, right, everyone slow down, 20 minutes of meditation. It's a little hard, actually. And then having done that, we would then go and design and build this center, which ended up opening up in Aoyama, Tokyo, for what he called Mind Fitness, which was sort of his mindfulness light version. And we created a pretty extensive innovation curricula, which used some design thinking methods and some other methods to help organizations like IBM, who would put together a team of 20 or 30 people, and then they would go to a place like this in Tokyo, and they would get to experience the kind of quality of mindfulness and meditation that Yamada-san was suggesting, and then they would follow the curricula to be able to produce new outcomes, find the right mindset, be able to achieve things. And the goal there was to create a center where creativity was possible in a way that it wasn't otherwise, creativity being sort of directly connected to innovation. And so, that was a project I felt really privileged to work on, because it just occupied such a unique perspective, a unique point of view on the world. And his point of view on the world was so it was such a counter narrative for me at that point, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the more you encounter counter narratives and are forced to kind of be exposed to them, the more you learn about what is important to you and what isn't. And so that was a really formative moment for me, being lucky enough to work on that project, because I just got to not only help build the curricula, but also understand more about all the different perspectives in terms of how innovation happens in these contexts. Unfortunately, in the pandemic, during those kind of dark summer days of 2020, the center no longer made it through the kind of like, we're not getting together in person era anymore, and so ended up closing down and is no more. So it's not possible to go and visit that project anymore. But it was an impressive level of ambition and an awesome space actually for the couple of years that it existed. Yeah,
I feel like those counter examples are really important to be coming from the top down, right?
Yeah.
I've realized a while ago that to be in the position to be a counterexample, you're exercising a privilege. That privilege is earned, right?
True. Yeah.
And it's just like the culture carrier, the chief vibe officer, right? You kind of have to earn it. You can't just go in, put your feet up on the table and say like, oh, don't be stressed.
Yeah, actually, I definitely, in a role that I was in a few years back, was the kind of person who'd been on Entrepreneur and then went in and asked all the annoying questions. And I had to learn the hard way that I really had to earn my leadership in that organization, rather than just assume that because I had differentiated experiences from everyone, that people would come in and listen to me. And to your point, it takes a minute for you to really understand the context and the work and what you're dealing with. And then once you do, either you've earned it because you're the CEO of the company and you have the influence over culture that other people don't, or you've earned it because you've generated organic leadership within inside the organization. And then you can start to have those conversations and shape counter narratives that become, honestly, the creative narratives that then become the narratives that go and drive the next wave of innovation in the organization. And I think that's how new, cool, exciting stuff happens in a company, when people are prepared to say, I think I have the authority, I think I've generated it for myself, and I think I have the people behind me to go and be able to have impact. In doing so, how do I go and make the change that we need to? Because I believe that we need to be more over here than we are over here.
Yeah, I love that. Let's take a shift real quick as we're coming to a close. Tell us about Parafoil. What are you doing now? You were in consulting, you're making the shift back to building entrepreneurship. Like, tell us about that.
That's right. So we've talked a lot about leadership and management, and I realized that at the C-suite, leadership and management's way easy when you've got all of that support. But after that, I also realized that so much of the energy is happening at the front line. And so parafoil.co is a leadership intelligence tool. So it analyzes how you lead in the work. It gives you actionable advice for how you can improve, and then it charts your progress day to day. So it's something that you can run alongside your work to make sure you understand how you're doing, and also get actionable, specific feedback and advice on the work you do. So you haven't got to take time away from the work to go and have a chat with a chatbot. You haven't got to go and add more check-ins with in another meeting. It literally shares with you advice after every single conversation you have, so that you can start to improve. And it's a unique proprietary AI model that's driving that. So the context window, the data set is much more trained on leadership development, early childhood psychology, which is the foundation of a lot of leadership styles, cognitive science, behavioral science, psycholinguistics, which is the way to understand what's going on with somebody cognitively on the basis of the language they emit. And so we use all of those tools in a differentiated way, from a way that kind of, I guess, vanilla flavored LLMs do. And we use that in combination with a cognitive science model, as well as just a straight up semantic analysis model, and put those things together to be able to generate this set of insights for you that mean that you can start to improve way faster than otherwise. So that's what I'm building now. I'm really passionate about it. We've got a team that's building that. We're also spread across the world. We've got a few folks in Ukraine and a few folks in the US, and some in Canada too. And yeah, that's kind of what occupies the entirety of my energy at this point in time, and I hope it does for the foreseeable future.
I think that's great. I think that's really important, and especially somebody who has the experience, has seen what good looks like, who's seen what not as good looks like,
Right.
and takes that mentorship training approach, right? Because you know what it's like to move up. And that's what I want to end with, because I really like to get to the actionable takeaways for the audience. So I'm seeing 3 layers, right? The IC that is either facing becoming a manager or wants to become a manager. The manager is trying to figure out their way, and the leader who needs to bring up the next generation. Let's split it into those 3. And for each 3, what kind of advice would you give to them? Starting with the IC.
Yeah. You know, if you're an IC in your career and maybe you're thinking about whether or not to take a step into leadership, I think the single best thing you can do for yourself and for the people you may end up inheriting as your direct reports is to ask yourself, is this really what I want? Is leadership a vocation for me, or is it just a progression? Because if it's just a progression, I wonder if there are other ways that you can go and continue to progress in a way that's full of technical excellence in some way. And but if you actually feel compelled to lead and take that step on a separate career path to go and lead, despite the fact that they look like they're channeling up like that, I think that's an organization's way of building the landscape for you. I'm not sure that's actually how it's going to feel in practice when you get there. So for an IC, I think the question for you is to go and spend some time with people who are in those roles and understand what their real day-to-day looks like.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And now let's focus on the managers.
Yes. Okay. So if you're a manager, I am, one, you've already made the choice. So you are somebody who's now in that space. I think the question for a manager is, do you want to continue to manage the work, or are you thinking about what it might look like to go and take on more leadership responsibility down the road? And if you're somebody who wants to go and take on more leadership responsibility, that really, I think, is about moving beyond the formal authority that you've got into a space where you're thinking about informal authority. Because to me, the difference between management and leadership is much more about informal authority that you're generating. We talked about the culture leaders inside an organization. So who in your company has generated informal authority? Who in your organization understands that? Spend time with them. And they could be 3 clicks below you in the organization, and you could be managing a team, but this person somehow is generating cultural authorship over what's going on. Those people are leaders, and you can learn from them. So go and spend time with the folks. And by the way, your company might be really small. If you want to go and do this in a different context, there are other people in the community, in the world. There are other people who have generated that kind of leadership. They know something that you don't if you want to follow on that path. And it's always good to spend more time with them. So I would encourage you to do that.
I love that. And now the leaders.
Yeah.
What do they need to be doing?
Look, on the leadership side, I think, hopefully by this point, you know what you don't know. And you're starting to realize that, the growth curve just continues forever. There are some things that you just continue to learn forever. And I think leadership is one of them. It's a practice, not a set of achievements. And so I think for somebody who's chosen to take the path to leadership and is already gathering power outside of their formal authority, I think spending more time in understanding how your leadership lands on people. What is the delta between who you think you want to be and how you want to be perceived, and the greatest leaders you've encountered, and yourself? Mm-hmm. And that often requires a little look inwards to understand, one, why you're here, and two, where you want to go next. And once you can start to plot that journey a bit more, then you can start to spend time thinking about, who are the leaders I really admire and why are they like that? Am I perceived in that way? Can I build a better understanding and relationship with whether I am? And I think that's the goal for many leaders. It's to close the gap between how they act and the impact they have.
That's great. That's great. I wanted to thank you so much for this conversation. One of the things that you made mention of earlier was that leadership is a lot easier when you have support. Yes. And I think a key takeaway here is that you need support. You need to have mentorship. You need to proactively go out and treat this as a skill you need to learn. And if you're not getting that, you have to go get it.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask for it, right? I've really enjoyed this conversation too, because I feel like I've learned so much just by talking to you. And so I think you're right. It's incumbent on everyone to be able to take that journey for themselves in some way, and don't be afraid to go and ask for the help you need.
Yeah, I am very excited to see what comes out with Parafoil. Keep us informed, as you start seeing the improvements. We want to hear what works, what doesn't, how do we increase the flywheel? How are we getting people away from this doomerist mentality, right? Not everybody has it, but you mentioned the stuff out on social media. I really feel the amount of toxic material about don't do your job, don't have a relationship with your coworkers. I mean, like a personal, not, but there seems to be a lot of resistance. And I really look forward to seeing you change that narrative.
Thanks, AJ. It's been great to have a conversation with you. Thanks so much. I appreciate the time.
Yeah. And thanks everybody for listening. We will be back soon with the next episode. Feel free to reach out. Any comments, like and subscribe to this, because I always forget to ask, and I should probably ask way in the beginning, but your support is what makes this possible. So thank you so much.